start this video, I'm going to give you a challenge. Can you tell me which are the 3 largest listed companies in the world? Okay, the first 2 are relatively easy. Many of you will think of companies like Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Google, or Amazon. Well, that's the way it goes. The 2 largest companies in the world by market value are Apple and Microsoft, respectively. But what about the third one? No, it's not Amazon, Google, or Meta. It's not even a technology company. It's neither American nor European. What's more, ironic as it may sound, it's not even a private company. We're talking about a leading state-owned company that is a pioneer in its sector. Do you have any idea which company we're talking about? Well, take a look at this. That's right, we're talking about Saudi Aramco, the Saudi Arabian government's massive oil company, the jewel in the crown of the Arab monarchy. To give you an idea, this company is so big that in 2022, it made more profit than Apple, Google, and Microsoft combined. We're talking about a whopping $158 billion. And again, this is a state-owned company, a government-run company. Here it seems that the capitalist theory that the state always mismanages its finances does not apply. But I know what many of you are thinking, Josh, that's normal for an oil company, no matter how state-owned or private it may be, to obtain huge profits. There's no big secret here. In the end, it's just digging a hole, extracting the black gold, and selling it at the price of gold. Anyone could do that. Well, if everyone can do it, how do you explain news stories like this?
Venezuelan oil company PDVSA has lost USD $8 billion since 2015. Pemex, Mexico's state-owned oil company, lost 52 billion pesos in the third quarter of 2022.
Venezuela is the country with the largest oil reserves in the world. Yet we have just seen that its oil company is a money-losing machine. Something similar is happening in Mexico, where its national oil company has lost money in 7 of the last 10 years of its activity. And as if that were not enough, we can also find other similar cases in this vein, such as the company YPF Argentina. The point is that if Saudi Aramco is the 3rd largest company in the world, it is not only because of its oil. If it is so big and makes so much profit, it is simply because its management is top-notch. As surprising as it may seem, unlike in regions such as Latin America or Southern Europe, Arab companies are characterized by very, very competitive state-owned companies. In other words, Arab state-owned companies work, and they work quite well. And this is something that is not only exclusive to the oil sector. As you can see in this graph, Arab and North African governments control companies that, apart from oil, are engaged in other strategic sectors, such as finance, industry, and transport. What's more, I bet most of you are familiar with companies like Qatar Airways, Al Jazeera, or Fly Emirates. All of them state-owned, Arab, and super productive in the global market. The question is, why? What makes them so competitive? Could their model be replicated in other countries? And if so, does that mean that a socialist country, without private enterprises, could become as rich as any other capitalist country? Well, if you are interested in the answers, today on Visualeconomik, we are going to tell you all about them. Stay tuned. But before that, here's another question. Are you aware that your personal information is being sold on the internet without your knowledge? This is widespread and on the rise. To give you an idea, the US has had over 2.6 billion records exposed through data breaches since 2004. And watch out, because many US data brokers collect data on non-US citizens as well. This is something we should all be concerned about, as scammers have used that consumer data to steal money or impersonate people. But there is no need yet to panic, or at least not to take as a given. The good news is that you have the right to protect your privacy by asking data brokers to remove the information they have about you. The bad news is that it would take you years to do it manually. But wait, because all is not lost. Enquiries, today's sponsor, will help you solve this problem in 3 easy steps. First, create an account and tell Enquiries whose personal data they will be removing. Second, grant Enquiries the right to work for you. They'll contact the data brokers and request the deletion of your personal data. Third, sit back and relax. Enquiries will handle any objections and keep you updated on their progress every step of the way. And the best part, the first 100 people to use the code ECONOMICEN at the link below will receive a 60% discount on Enquiries. Don't miss this chance to protect your privacy. If we want to understand why Arab SOEs are so successful, the first thing we have to do is explain why SOEs in other countries, such as Latin American oil companies, perform so badly and lose so much money. And to that end, I ask you to pay attention to the following news item.
In 11 years, PDVSA increased its payroll with more than 40,000 PSUV militants.
What you have just seen is the headline of a news item explaining that the Venezuelan oil company PDVSA hired thousands of workers who were not needed for years and years. In other words, the Venezuelan government used its state-owned company to give salaries to people who, in reality, were not going to work. Or if they did go into work, they did not have very important tasks to do. To show you the magnitude of the matter, in 1998, PDVSA employed 40,300 employees and produced close to 3 million barrels of oil per day. But curiously, 2 decades later, in 2015, the workforce had increased to 150,000 employees. Yet production not only did not increase, but plummeted to 2.5 million barrels per day. Basically, the Venezuelan government's oil company multiplied its number of workers by 3 to produce less oil than it did at the beginning. And what can I say? You don't really need to be a genius to realize that in that company, work was not really work. Be that as it may, the case of PDVSA is not an isolated case. The truth is that wherever we look, it is really easy to find state-owned companies in several countries that systematically hire many more workers than they need. The question is, why do these types of companies tend to hire many more people than necessary? Well, the answer can be summed up in 2 reasons. The first is that if you are a politician, hiring people usually serves to guarantee votes in future elections. Think about it. If you assemble a huge group of civil servants who have been hired thanks to you, it is likely that these civil servants will vote for you in the next elections. But the second and the most common reason is that state-owned companies can help politicians to disguise certain worrying economic data. For example, Spain is the country with the highest unemployment rate in Europe. In this country, the unemployment rate is always under scrutiny to judge whether a government has managed the economy well or badly. And knowing this, let me ask you a question. If you were the president of Spain and you wanted to pretend that the employment data were going very well and that the economy was taking off like a rocket, what do you think would be a very good way to improve the unemployment figures? Indeed, by hiring people in the administration or in government-owned companies. Well, guess what? No sooner said than done.
The public sector in Spain created twice as many jobs as the private sector this summer. Had it not been for the creation of public employment, Spain would have had the lowest increase in employment in 10 years.
In summary, the first problem with SOEs is that most of them tend to prioritize political objectives rather than efficiency and profitability objectives. That, along with legal political objectives. Because in the same bag, we could put the mafia and corrupt plots that often serve to plunder and make public administrations lose even more money. The corrupt people, as we find all throughout history. What can I say? But what happens when a state-owned company constantly loses money and can no longer be used as a political tool? Well, never fear. Then there's the second problem. You see, the fact is that state-owned companies have a great advantage that makes them practically indestructible. This advantage is called weak budget constraints, or to translate it into the Spanish context. When they lose money, state-owned companies do not go bankrupt, but are rescued with subsidies from the government of the day. And this is very important because it implies that a state-owned company that cannot go bankrupt does not have much incentive to do things well. That is to say, at the end of the day, no one is going to lose his or her job in a state-owned company, no matter how bad it goes, no matter how much money is lost. So why make the effort to do things better? State-owned companies are machines for accumulating deficiencies that no one corrects. Let's just say that there is no natural selection as there is in private companies. And the worst thing is that nobody has incentives to fix those deficiencies. But be that as it may, let's imagine for a moment that a government sets up a state-owned company, does not use it for political purposes, and does not bail it out when things go wrong. Would that be enough to make such a state-owned company profitable? Well, no, because there is still a third reason why state-owned companies perform poorly, and that reason is bureaucracy. Returning to the case of Pemex, Mexico's oil company, an academic report explains that its managers used to have major administrative problems in running these companies. For example, if they needed to make a large capital investment, if they needed to perhaps set up a new refinery, they could not do it directly. First, they had to negotiate budgets with politicians, then coordinate with government officials, and then fill out endless paperwork to meet regulatory criteria. At the end of the day, this only served to waste time, money, and opportunities. Bureaucracy tied the hands of the the managers, who, no matter how good they were, could not work freely. In any case, given the three major problems of traditional SOEs, what have the Arab countries done to avoid them? What is their secret to having such efficient SOEs? Well, let's take a look.
Arab-style statism.
If there is one thing that the Arab countries are known for, beyond living surrounded by oil, it is for being one of the regions with the most personalistic dictators in the world. To sum it up, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain are regions where the royal family is all powerful, and the rest of society adapts to its hierarchy without complaint. And the truth is that when it comes to managing state-owned companies, this can have certain advantages. For example, unlike other countries, Arab dictators do not have to use their state-owned companies to pursue populist objectives. After all, they don't have to win elections every 4 years. They don't have to convince voters with bread and circuses. Instead, they can prioritize the profitability of their companies in the long run over other political criteria, such as making up unemployment data. In the same way, dictators do not need to establish harsh bureaucracies and regulations over their companies either. Dictators are the top managers of companies, and what they usually do to manage them, if they really want to make money out of them, is to handpick highly qualified managers with professional experience in the sector. Without going any further, if we look at who is on the board of directors of Saudi Aramco, we will see that it includes important executives with extensive professional experience and recognition in other private companies such as Chevron or Shell. But why is all this important? Well, it is important because it teaches us that, in reality, Arab state-owned companies operate in much the same way as private companies do. The managers chosen by the dictators have total freedom to hire, fire, and make the strategic changes they deem appropriate. In short, they are companies with an almost non-existent bureaucracy that operate with professional experts at its head. But what if these professionals perform poorly? What if they start losing money? Well, quite simply, they will be fired and replaced. In this way, everyone has the same objectives: to make the company profitable. No populism or short-term political objectives. The only thing that is sought is profitability and the smooth running of the company, something that, as we've already seen, does not usually happen in conventional state-owned companies. But stay tuned, because there's more to come. Another major difference between Arab SOEs and those of the rest of the world is that their daily operations are strictly related to private partnerships. You see, about 90 years ago, when oil had not yet been discovered in the lands of Arabia, the first companies that began to investigate and work on the possible oil fields were private US companies. Over time, once oil was discovered, it was also these private American companies, along with the government of countries such as Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, that began to extract and enrich themselves with the black gold. The Arab oil story began as a close public-private partnership. In fact, although today, Aramco is an all-Saudi company, it started out as a semi-American company. Evidence of this is that its name is actually an acronym for Arab American Oil Company. Later, in the 1980s, the Arab governments ended up buying out the American stakes in their companies. That is, nationalizing them and converting them into fully state-owned companies. However, partnerships with the private sector have continued to this day. Check this out.
Petronas, Saudi Aramco, announced formation of their 2 new joint ventures in Malaysia. Saudi Aramco invites bids for water project in Zuluf oil field on PPP model.
What you have just seen are 2 examples of what are known as joint ventures and PPPs, which in short are alliances formed between 2 companies, in this case state-owned and private, in order to carry out a business. To give you an idea, in Saudi Arabia alone, 18 new projects of this type have been announced for 2030, with a combined investment of more than $42 billion. The beauty of this system is that Arab companies can take advantage of the knowledge, technology, and contacts of private companies that would otherwise be very difficult for them to obtain. It is basically a way of harnessing the full potential of capitalism, innovation, and private development, but applied to a state-owned company. Quite an interesting idea, don't you think? Well, whether you find it interesting or not, I'm sure there's one question that you're all pondering. Does everything we have just said mean that for a government-owned company to function well, it simply has to be managed like a private company? Could socialist countries like Cuba or Venezuela apply these principles and become communist superpowers? Well, Visualeconomik viewers, I'm afraid it's not as simple as that. We haven't told you everything yet, so you better stay tuned.
Importing the revolution?
If a state-owned company in any other country were to try to replicate the Arab model, it would likely have two major problems. The first is that it would be very difficult to replicate the Arab model in a democratic system. That is to say, democratic systems must comply with guarantees of transparency, equality, and must also be shielded against corruption. The problem is that in order to achieve all this, large bureaucracies, hiring controls, and a host of other measures must be put in place that would hinder the management of the company. The solution could be to make companies less bureaucratic, in spite of everything, and allow them to operate under the orders of the politicians of the day. But we have already said that politicians, as a general rule, do not have much incentive to make companies make money. They just want to use them as tools of power. And you will say, well, okay, maybe in democratic countries the model would be difficult to apply, but what about other countries like Cuba or Venezuela? Those countries are dictatorships, and dictators like Maduro don't really need to win elections, or at least elections with guarantees. And yes, it is true. What happens is that although dictatorships do not have to win elections, they do have to provide certain social support. That is something they achieve, in part, by using their state-owned companies to distribute bread and circuses. The difference with the Arabs is that the latter have a very hierarchical religious society, with historical restrictions on political formations, and with an iron fist against revolutions. Politically and culturally, we're talking about completely different societies. Let's say that in these countries, there are no revolutionary traditions, and that, in part, is thanks to a kind of social contract. What social contract, you may ask? Well, basically the notion that if things are going well in the country, it will translate into benefits for everyone. Also, if you look at countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or the United Arab Emirates, they don't have high taxes. In fact, there are places where corporate taxes are zero. Companies without taxes. Yes, that is what I said. The thing is, how is that possible? Where does the government get the money then? Well, from their companies. For example, in Saudi Arabia, about 90% of government revenues came from money generated directly or indirectly by Saudi Aramco. And later, part of that money is distributed among the citizens, so that they remain silent and compliant. In a way, it is as if the Arab sheikhs have the permission of the citizens to be dictators in exchange for not collecting taxes, and in exchange they share part of the oil profits. And that's why there is so much freedom to run state-owned companies. As long as there's money coming in, everything is fine. But wait a minute, because from an operational point of view, all this has another advantage. Because they don't need taxes, Arab countries are able to pay higher salaries to the best professionals in the world. Without going any further, we have seen that Aramco executives previously worked in companies such as Shell or Chevron. Well, if instead of working in European or American companies, these executives work in Arab companies, they can save almost half of their salary in taxes. The bottom line is, working for Arabs means earning more money. On top of that, the Arab countries are countries in constant growth. It's a region that more and more companies are approaching due to their incredible tax conditions, thanks to which it is becoming increasingly attractive to secure talent and support industry in these countries, which inevitably increases the efficiency of state-owned companies in a collateral way. That is precisely why, in reality, to speak of a communist state following the Arab model does not make much sense. These state-owned enterprises function by imitating a private model and feeding off of it. The Arab government companies are companies located only in strategic sectors such as transport, finance, or communications, and all the rest of the economy is made up of private companies that support the latter, private companies that follow ultra-capitalist and free market regulations. In short, it is a model that draws heavily from the private sector. But at this point, Visualeconomik viewers, it is now your turn. What do you think of the Arab business management model? Do you think it could be replicated in your country? And what other problems or advantages do you think this type of management could have? You can leave your answers in the comments. And if you like the video, please like it. And if you don't want to miss any of the following videos, please subscribe and click on that little bell. Okay, that's all from us today. Catch you in the next video. See you very soon.